Welcome to our channel, World Inheritance. Today we will talk about the third and final part of the Egyptian Pharaonic dynasty. So stay with us. The history of Persian Egypt is divided into two eras after the first Achaemenid invasion of Egypt, which included a period of independence. The 27th dynasty of Egypt, 525 to 404 BC, also known as the First Egyptian Satrapy. The 30th dynasty of Egypt, 343 to 332 BC, also known as the Second Egyptian Satrapy. In the 5th century BC, Persian rulers, especially Cyrus the Great, sought to expand their occupation to include Egypt. The expansion was to achieve military and economic dominance, and Egypt was a priority for Cyrus the Great, largely due to the desire of the Nile River and the valley as economic assets. The contemporary Egyptian pharaoh, Ahmose, tried to stave off occupation by forming alliances with neighboring rulers, particularly Polycrates of Samos. Polycrates, son of Ajax, was tyrant of Samos from the 540s BC to 522 BC. He had a reputation as a fierce warrior and enlightened tyrant. These rulers also had a vested interest in preventing the more significant Persian expansion into their region. This was successful for a time, and as such, the Persian occupation of Egypt was never achieved under Cyrus the Great because he died before realizing his dream. However, this was later achieved during the reign of his son Cambyses II. Thus, Persian rule in Egypt, also referred to as the Achaemenid Empire, began under Cambyses II, who overthrew the last pharaoh of the 26th dynasty, Ahmose's son, Psamtik III. Egypt became an important and prosperous supplier to the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire existed between 525 and 330 BC, although Persian rule was not constant throughout that entire period, as there were periods of restored Egyptian independence, in particular, between the First and Second Egyptian satrapies. The First Egyptian Satrapy. The country was suppressed in 525 BC during the Persian invasion, led by Cambyses ibn Cyrus. The Persian invasion occurred at the beginning of the reign of Psamtik III, and Cambyses did several things before, subjugating the major states of Asia and some of the Greeks, and he participated in Asia with a large army that did not attack Egypt, and this army succeeded in joining him and occupying the world. The reasons that helped the Persian invasion of Egypt. After Egypt took control of the civilized world from the beginning of the 16th century and spread its sciences and civilization in various countries, the factors of weakness began to weaken its entity as a result of internal divisions on the one hand, and its indulgence in luxury on the other hand. In addition to this, Egypt used mercenary soldiers from the Greeks and others, and the nationalist spirit in the army weakened. Since the reign of Psamtik I, Egypt has not been able to regain its strength after the divisions that weakened it before. There are the biggest factors that helped to weaken Egypt: the Persian invasion of Egypt, and the three betrayals that it had a painful impact in weakening the resistance. The first of these betrayals was the Jews' agreement with Cambyses to use their country as a base to attack Egypt in exchange for him allowing them to build the Temple of Jerusalem. This agreement also gained the loyalty of the Jewish mercenary soldiers who were in the Egyptian army. They helped the Persians invade Egypt, and made Palestine a base to attack it. Secondly, Phan's betrayal. This Phans was a Greek from Helicardas, and he was the head of a group of mercenary soldiers in the Egyptian army since the time of Cambyses. He betrayed his covenant with Egypt, fled to the enemy camp, and informed Cambyses of the secrets of the war plans that the Egyptians had prepared to resist the Persian campaign. This betrayal began before the death of Cambyses, and it undoubtedly had a profound impact in weakening the Egyptian front. Third, the betrayal of the Bedouins in Sinai. Cambyses was ignorant of the route he should take in Sinai, so Phans, the traitor, informed him of the paths of the desert and facilitated his contact with the leaders of the Bedouins living in Sinai. They provided him and his army with water and supplies across the desert until he reached the gates of Egypt. The betrayal of the Bedouins was one of the reasons that facilitated Cambyses' invasion. The country. Before the start of the invasion, Cambyses, Ahmose II, an Egyptian king, ruled from 570 to 526 BC, of the 26th dynasty, died at the end of the year 526 BC, and his son, Psamtik III, assumed the throne. Cambyses learned of the death of his mighty enemy upon his arrival to Belos, considered this a good omen for him, and the Egyptians were pessimistic about the death of Cambyses. Psamtik III's accession to the throne took place in the most dangerous circumstances. Cambyses was undoubtedly more capable than him in repelling the Persian aggression, and he had experience, competence in leadership, and influence over his citizens, which gave great hope in repelling the Persian advance. After his death, the country went through a period of turmoil in ideas that helped the Persians invade. Cambyses mobilized his soldiers in Palestine, and anchored his fleet in Acre. The Persian army advanced from Gaza and met the Egyptian army at Balaz, Al-Farma, in the year 525 BC, assisted by its fleet from the sea. A battle took place in Balaz, in which the Egyptian army led by Psamtik III was defeated after a slight resistance. The Persian army was larger in number and stronger. Here some mythical stories claim that Cambyses helped to paralyze the resistance movement in Balaz, so he ordered that dogs, cats, and other sacred animals be placed at the head of the attacking force, so the Egyptians refrained from using their weapons for fear of these animals. It is a narration of apparent fabrication, and if it had a shadow of the truth, why did Egypt's enemies not use it over the centuries? The Persians met another resistance in Ain Shams. Psamtik III returned to Memphis to resist the invaders, so Cambyses pursued him. Memphis fell to the attack of the Persian army, and Psamtik III was captured by Cambyses. After the young king, Psamtik III, was captured by the Persians, he was treated harshly and brutally. This young king was truly unlucky, as he had only been on the throne for only 6 months when he was surprised by the Persian invasion, and he did not have enough time to prepare to repel it. When Cambyses entered Memphis, he deliberately humiliated the Egyptians, so he seated Psamtik and the elder Egyptians whom he had captured with him at the entrance to the city to farm them. He dressed his daughter and the eldest daughters in the clothes of maids and female slaves and ordered them to carry jars to bring water and walk before him. This sight made Psamtik sad, but he was frozen and silent, looked at the ground and bowed down. Then Cambyses ordered a friend of his to pass by Psamtik in the guise of poverty and begging. He was moved by his sight and wept. His weeping for his friend in his ordeal, after his flogging when he saw his daughter in the clothes of slaves, was the most eloquent example of loyalty and honorable character. Cambyses did not spare Psamtik and killed him. Since he did not see him submit to the Persian invasion, his rule did not last more than 6 months. With his death, the 26th dynasty ended. Cambyses usurped the kingship in Egypt and established a dynasty that historians called the 27th dynasty. It represented an abominable occupation and could not be included among the Egyptian dynasties. Then Cambyses prepared 2 armies that left Thebes, one of which he personally led to occupy Nubia, but he suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of the rulers of Napata, who turned him back. The second army's fate was worse than the fate of the first army. When he walked from Thebes, he reached the Kharija oases, where he rested from the hardships of travel and took what he needed of supplies. He headed towards the Siwa oasis in order to seize it and demolish the temple of Ammonius. A strong storm of wind blew upon the soldiers, blowing sand on them, and they perished in the desert, and none of them survived. Nobody, and none of them went to Siwa, and none of them returned to the Karga oases. Cambyses appointed himself king, pharaoh, of Egypt. Cambyses did not stay long after his failure to conquer Nubia and Siwa and returned to Persia. He died on the way in 522 BC. It was said that he died by suicide as he was suffering from nervous attacks. His suicide was attributed to his failure in his campaign against Nubia, and his other campaign against the Siwa oasis. There are many other rumors about his death. He was succeeded by his son Darius I, or called Darius I. Darius wanted to win over the Egyptians and relieve them of the humiliation they suffered from the invasion, so he lifted some restrictions on them and came to Egypt as a visitor in the year 518 BC. He ordered a change in the policy of his father Cambyses and decided on partial reforms. But the Egyptians remained discontent with the foreign occupation, and began to prepare for liberation from it. Moreover, the Persian invasion did not diminish the status and vitality of the Egyptians. Persia was the superior military state in that era, and it was undoubtedly stronger than Egypt at that time. Darius ruled from 522 to 486 BC. Darius's reign in Egypt was marked by the following. Darius reorganized the Egyptian administration, dividing the country into provinces, satrapies, ruled by governors appointed by the Persian king. Darius imposed a new tax system on the Egyptians, which led to discontent among some Egyptians. Although he supported Zoroastrianism, Darius tolerated ancient Egyptian religion and allowed Egyptian priests to practice their religion. Darius encouraged trade between Egypt and the rest of the Achaemenid Empire, which led to an economic boom in Egypt. Darius built many projects in Egypt, including canals, roads, and temples. Darius tried to integrate Egyptian culture with Persian culture, but these attempts were met with resistance from some Egyptians. Despite attempts at assimilation, Darius allowed ancient Egyptian culture to continue, including the ancient Egyptian language and ancient Egyptian religion. In general, the reign of Darius I in Egypt was a period of stability and economic and cultural prosperity. Neither Darius nor the other Persian pharaohs wanted to completely erase the culture of the nations they conquered, but rather only applied Persian customs to them. The reign of Darius also witnessed a number of revolts against the Persian occupation, although none of these attempts to restore sovereign Egyptian rule were successful. People's revolts against the Persian occupation. The Egyptian people did not accept the Persian occupation and continued to fight it, and their revolutions continued from time to time. The first revolt against the Persians, 486 BC. The first revolution against Persian colonialism was in the year 486 BC, during the reign of King Darius I. He was busy preparing equipment to march with his land and sea forces on Greece. These wars were known as the Median Wars, and King Darius intended to invade Greece, and he engaged them in a long-term war, which began with the Battle of Marathon near Athens, in which the Persians were defeated in the year 490 BC. After the defeat of the Persians in the Battle of Marathon, Dara intended to resume the invasion again with the army of Gerar, but he died before carrying out his promise. During his preparations to resume fighting, he withdrew part of the occupation forces from Egypt to use them in the upcoming battle. However, during the reign of Dara, a national movement for liberation from foreign colonialism arose in the country. The Egyptians revolted and clashed with the occupation forces deployed throughout the valley, and defeated them. However, the Egyptian revolutions did not succeed because of Dara's son, Xerxes I. When Darius I died in 485 BC, his son Xerxes succeeded him on the throne of Persia. He marched on Egypt to suppress the revolution, but its people confronted him. The Egyptians revolted for the second time against Persian colonialism in the year 460 BC, led by the leader Inaros, a member of the Psamtik family. The citizens responded to his call and participated in his revolution. After they defeated the Persian army, Xerxes defeated them and executed Inaros in 456 BC. The second revolution failed. Egypt returned under Persian rule again. Then the Egyptians revolted again in a third revolution, which led to the evacuation of the Persians for the first time, in the year 404 BC. Xerxes died in the year 424 BC, and he was succeeded on the throne by Dara II. Egypt revolted against the Persians, led by the hero Amir Taus, Ammonius Her, in the year 410 BC. The revolution continued for several years. This revolution was victorious, and the country was liberated from Persian occupation in 404 BC. Emirtius, Ammonius Her, the liberator of the country from the Persian occupation, was sold as king of independent Egypt in the year 404 BC. The 28th dynasty was the third and last dynasty of the late ancient Egyptian era, which lasted from 404 BC to 398 BC. This dynasty ruled Egypt for a relatively short time. It included only one pharaoh, Amereteus, also known as Psamtik V. King Amirtius. He rebelled against the Achaemenid rule of Egypt with the Egyptian ruler Inaros in 465 to 463 BC. He ruled Egypt from 404 to 399 BC. He became famous for the restoration of temples and the construction of monuments, support of arts and literature. He was interested in reviving the ancient Egyptian culture and strengthening the identity of Egypt. Faced with an invasion by the Persians in 399 BC, he was defeated by his successor Nefertiti in open battle and executed in Memphis, an event that the Aramaic papyrus Brooklyn 13 refers to as occurring in October 399 BC. The 28th dynasty was a period of political turmoil and internal conflicts. This dynasty did not leave significant architectural monuments. The 29th dynasty of Egypt is usually classified as the fourth dynasty of the late antique Egyptian period. Founded after the overthrow of Amurtius, the only pharaoh of the 28th dynasty, by Nefertiti in 398 BC, the dynasty ruled the 29th dynasty for only 18 years, from 398 to 380 BC. Nefertiti chose the city of Mendes as the capital of his family. After the death of Nefertiti, Haker ruled. He was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh of the 29th dynasty. He ruled for 13 years, more than half of the entire reign of the dynasty. Haker had a close relationship with his predecessor, the king, founder of the 29th Pharaonic dynasty, Nefertiti. After the latter's death, a struggle broke out over rule and leadership of the dynasty after King Nefertiti, which resulted in Haker claiming the throne in competition with Psamtik and Meathes. This was only mentioned in Eusebius of Manetho. As a result, Haker was considered the legitimate heir of King Nefertiti, or raped him in some way. In 1986, historian John Ray suggested that Haker was the heir of King Nefertiti, who initially ruled without hindrance. In the second year of his reign, he was overthrown by Psamtik and ruled for a year. After this year, Haker was able to regain his rightful throne by overthrowing his usurper Psamotius. His reign continued from the date of his first coronation, just to pretend that this gap never happened. As for the third claimant, Meathes, he cannot be included in this conflict. But his role is secondary, assuming he really existed, and is unknown. This is to accept the hypothesis of the opinion of Egyptologists such as Alan B. Lloyd and Toby Wilkinson. Haker died in 379/8 BC, leaving the throne to his son Nefertiti II. However, he was only able to maintain power for 4 months. He was the last pharaoh of the 29th dynasty, and his name does not appear on any traces. However, the only documentation for him is found at the end of Manetho, and in the Demotic history. Before the military leader Nectanebo I overthrew him, and succeeded him in power and the beginning of his rule. The 13th dynasty. The 30th dynasty of Egypt. This dynasty is usually classified as the 5th dynasty of the late period of ancient Egypt and ruled from 380 BC until 343 BC. The founder of this dynasty, Nectanebo I. Nectanebo was a military commander in the army from Samonaud, the son of an important military officer named Jedher and a woman whose full name is unknown, and ends with Mu. A monument found at Hermopolis provides some evidence that he rose to power by overthrowing and possibly killing the last pharaoh of the 29th dynasty, Nefertiti II. It has been suggested that Nectanebo received help in his coup from the Athenian general Chabrias because Athens supported him in his coup against the 29th dynasty. Nectanebo carried out coronation ceremonies in about 379/8 BC in Sa el Hagar and Memphis, and moved the capital from Mendes to Samonaud. The relationships between Nectanebo and the pharaohs of the previous dynasty are not entirely clear. Nectanebo showed little regard for both Nefertiti II and his father Haker, calling the former an incompetent and the latter a usurper. Despite this, he appears to have given more credit to Nefertiti, who was previously thought to be Nectanebo's father or grandfather, but this view is now believed to have been due to a misinterpretation of demotic texts. However, it has been suggested that both Haker and Nectanebo may have been relatives of Nefertiti. Nectanebo had 2 famous sons, Teos, whom he chose as his successor, and Jahapemu. Nectanebo was an amazing builder and restorer, to an extent that Egypt had not seen for centuries. He ordered work in many temples across the country. On the sacred island of Philae near Aswan, the construction of the Temple of Isis, which would become one of the most important religious sites in ancient Egypt, began with the construction of its atrium. Nectanebo also started the first gate in the court of Ammonius-Re at Karnak, and the oldest known mammies found at Dendera is believed to have been built by him. Nectanebo supported the cult of sacred animals, which became prominent between the two periods of Persian occupation, as evidenced by archaeological finds at Hermopolis, Soft al-Hana, and Mendes. Other structures ordered by the king were found in the religious buildings of Memphis, Tanis, and the Cape. First Gate, Karnak. Nectanebo was also generous towards the priesthood. He issued an edict in his first year, which was discovered on a stela in Nocrates, requiring that 10% of the taxes collected from imports and from local production in the city be used for the Temple of Neith at Sais. A twin of this painting was recently discovered in the city of Heraklion. The aforementioned Hermopolis stela, placed in front of the gate of Ramesses II, lists donations made by Nectanebo to local gods, and other favors were also granted to the Horus priests at Edfu. Nectanebo's large spending showed his devotion to the gods, and at the same time he financially supported the country's wealthy owners and spent on defending the country. Repelling the Persian invasion. In 374/3 BC, Nectanebo faced a Persian attempt to reoccupy Egypt, which was still considered by the Achaemenid king Ardashir II to be merely a rebellious province. After 6 years of preparations and putting pressure on Athens to recall the Greek general Chabrias, Ardashir sent a large army led by the Athenian general Iphicrates and the Persian general Pharnabazus. It has been recorded that the army consisted of over 200,000 soldiers including Persian soldiers, Greek mercenaries, and about 500 ships. The fortifications on the branch of the Nile at Al-Farma, established by order of Nectanebo, forced the enemy fleet to look for another way to navigate the Nile. Eventually, the fleet was able to find a way through the less fortified subducting branch. Athenian general Chapirias, left, with Spartan king Agesilaus, center, with Egyptian king Nectanebo I, Egypt in 361 BC. At that time, the mutual distrust that arose between Iphicrates and Pharnabazus prevented the enemy from reaching Memphis. Then the annual Nile flood and the determination of the Egyptian defenders to defend their lands turned what initially seemed like a certain defeat for Nectanebo I and his forces into a complete victory. From 368 BC, several western provinces of the Achaemenid Empire began to rebel against Ardashir II, and Nectanebo provided financial support to the rebellious provinces and re-improved relations with both Sparta and Athens. Nectanebo died during his 19th year as ruler. His grave and mummy have not been found. At the end of his reign, in the 16th year of his reign, 364/3 BC, perhaps to fix the succession problems that had plagued his predecessors, Nectanebo restored the long-standing practice of co-rule and made his son Teos co-ruler. However, shortly after Teos' accession, his brother betrayed him and managed to place his son Nectanebo II on the throne of Egypt. Nectanebo II, also known as Nectaneb II, ruled between the years 360 to 342 BC. He was the third and last king of the 30 Egyptian dynasty, in addition to being the last indigenous ruler of ancient Egypt. The first 8 years of Nectanebo II's rule were far from Persian interference due to family problems. In the ruling Persian house, however, in the middle of the 4th century BC, the new Persian ruler, Artaxerxes III, succeeded in imposing his control over most parts of the Persian Empire, and tried to invade Egypt, but his campaign failed, and because of that, some Greek and Phoenician cities succeeded in challenging the power. Persian militarily for some time. The Persians tried to regain Egypt several times in 385, 383, and 373 BC before and after Nectanebo's rule. After Nectanebo's rule and the Persians' preoccupation with their problems, religion played an important role in Nectanebo's internal politics. He began his reign by supervising the funeral of the Apis bull in Memphis. Nectanebo also added decorations to the eastern and western temples of Apis. Among the notable structures erected during the reign of Nectanebo II are the Temple of Khnum at Elephantine and the Temple of Ammonius at Sektum, Siwa. Nectanebo II was responsible for increasing the popularity of the cult of Bochis. Under Nectanebo II, a decree was issued prohibiting quarrying activities in the so-called mysterious mountains of Abydos. The king was presented as being in the protection of the gods, and indeed there is a large stone statue in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City in the United States of America that depicts King Nectanebo II in a small form between the feet of the Lord Horus, the famous Egyptian deity and protector of the sacred Egyptian monarchy, who was depicted in the shape of a large hawk. Foreign affairs during the reign of Nectanebo II were linked to repeated Achaemenid attempts to reconquer Egypt. During this period, he was able to build a new army and employ Greek mercenaries, which was a common practice at the time. In 358 BC, Nectanebo was able to repel an Achaemenid invasion attempt led by Prince Ardashir III. In about 351 BC, the Achaemenid Empire embarked on a new attempt to reclaim Egypt. After a year of fighting, Nectanebo and his allies, Diophantus of Athens and Lamius of Sparta, were able to defeat the Achaemenids again. After achieving a resounding victory, Nectanebo II was given the title Nectanebo the Divine Falcon, and cults were created in his name. In 345–44 BC, Nectanebo supported the Phoenician rebellion against the Achaemenid Empire, led by the king of Sidon, Tense, and sent military aid in the form of 4,000 Greek mercenaries led by Mentor of Rhodes. However, after Mentor heard of the approaching forces of Ardashir III, he reached out to the Persians and abandoned his allegiance to Nectanebo. Until the Battle of Pharma came. In 343 BC, Ardashir III had, in addition to 330,000 Persians, a force of 14,000 Greeks supplied by the Greek cities of Asia Minor, 4,000 under the command of the Tutor of Rhodes, consisting of troops he had brought to the aid of Tense from Egypt, 3,000 sent by Argos, and 1,000 from Thebes. He divided these forces into 3 legions, and placed at the head of each of them a Persian and a Greek. The Greek leaders were Lacrates of Thebes, the Tutor of Rhodes, and Nicostratus of Argos, while the Persians were led by Rosaces, Aristoxanes, and Bagoas. Nectanebo II resisted with an army of 100,000, including 20,000 Greek mercenaries. Nectanebo II occupied the Nile and its various branches with his large naval fleet. The country's geography, filled with numerous canals and strongly fortified cities, was to his advantage, and resistance to Nectanebo II might have been expected to last a long time, if not be successful. Although he lacked good generals, he was so confident in his command powers that he was defeated by Greek mercenary generals, and his forces were eventually defeated by the combined Persian armies. After his defeat, Nectanebo II hastily fled to Memphis, leaving the defense of the fortified cities in the hands of his garrisons. These garrisons consisted of partly Greek and partly Egyptian forces. Among them were those who were easily sown with jealousy and suspicion by the Persian leaders. As a result, the Persians quickly captured several cities across Lower Egypt and were advancing on Memphis when Nectanebo II decided to leave the country and flee south to Ethiopia. The Persian army completely defeated the Egyptians and occupied the Lower Nile Delta. After Nectanebo II fled to Ethiopia, all of Egypt submitted to Ardashir III. The Jews in Egypt were sent either to Babylon or to the southern coast of the Caspian Sea, the same location to which the Jews of Phoenicia had previously been sent. After this victory over the Egyptians, Ardashir III demolished the city walls, began a reign of terror, and proceeded to plunder all the temples. Persia gained a great deal of wealth from this plunder. Ardashir III also increased taxes and attempted to weaken ancient Egypt enough so that it could not revolt again against Persia. Over the 10 years that Persia controlled Egypt, believers in the indigenous religion were persecuted and the holy books were stolen. Before returning to Persia, Vernderius was appointed satrap of Egypt. With the wealth gained from the reconquest of Egypt, Ardashir III was able to reward his mercenaries amply. Then he returned to his capital after successfully completing his conquest of Egypt. With the end of the rule of the great Egyptian pharaoh, King Nectanebo II, the descendants of the pharaohs disappear from the rule of Egypt, and with the occupation of Egypt by Alexander the Great, Egypt becomes a kingdom ruled by strangers until the revolution of 1952 occurs, and Egypt is ruled by Major General Mohammed Naguib, the first Egyptian ruler. Egypt after the pharaohs. Wait for us in the next